Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the show. Today, it's been actually a while since I've done a music interview. I'm very excited about this one. This has been in the wings for a couple weeks now. So I have Lauren on the show, and we're going to talk to Lauren today about her debut album, Invisible Woman, which came out this past October, so a little over 3 months ago now, and a very incredible backstory with Lauren as well. So we're going to get into Lauren's origins in music, her growing up, and many, many other different topics, I'm sure. Lauren, welcome to the show. How are you today?
I'm great. Thank you for having me, Matt.
Yeah, thank you so much for coming on. I have been excited about this. We have a mutual sort of friend, colleague, Joe from the online recording studio. So shout out to him for helping be the middle person, setting this up. So yeah, Lauren, I'm very excited to talk about your album. I know it's such a thrill, and there's so much work that goes into writing, recording an album, and then, getting it out there. And then it's almost like the real work begins when you're promoting it and getting it into people's ears and hands and such. Before we do that, though, I really want to give you an open floor, open opportunity just to give your story, some chunks of your origins in music, the way you were raised, where you were raised, and just a little bit more about Lauren, please.
Sure. So songwriting was my first love in life when I was a teenager. I grew up in Nashville, Tennessee. So I was very fortunate to be in Music City and to be surrounded by a lot of really amazing creatives. I was a musical child for sure and studied piano and singing and stuff, but I learned to write songs in high school. My English teacher was a songwriter. And I fell in love with it, and had a lot of opportunities to record and perform and write when I was in high school. I did an EP as my part of my college application with George Marinelli, who is Bonnie Raitt's guitar player and also a producer. And then life kind of pulled me away from music. I went to Yale, which was wonderful, and ended up studying history and going into investment banking.
Ooh. Okay, kind of went the other way there. Yeah.
Yeah. Which I would say was like more of a reflection of what I felt like was expected of me than what I really wanted to do. And it, was a great experience, but I wasn't happy doing that work. But I was able to save some money doing that work. And so I ended up pursuing a graduate degree in clinical social work because I really wanted to work with people. I think people and their stories are fascinating. I had a very transformative experience myself in psychotherapy while I was recovering from an eating disorder, and I wanted to do that work. And so that's what I did. I became a clinical social worker, got all my hours. I did a bunch of different, I worked in outpatient community mental health. I worked in inpatient psychiatry at Bellevue Hospital, and did some postgraduate training in eating and body image issues, and then opened a private practice in Manhattan treating eating and body image issues. And I also went to yoga school in the middle of that. So,
hey, yeah.
So but I ended up, I'm fascinated by embodiment and the connection between mind and body. And my private practice really focused on helping people be in their bodies and feel and learn about that connection, but then also be able to listen to their bodies. I think that a lot of us are the way that our culture is, we get very disconnected from the neck down. And a lot of people who struggle with body image and with their relationship with food are experiencing that. And I love that work. I still love that work. I may go back to that work at some point. I don't know. But I had a very particular set of circumstances that led me to where I am now, which is that I had a child at the time. I'm married. I had one child, and we decided to move our family out of Manhattan to Westchester. And because of that, I closed my private practice because I was relocating. And this was in 2019, just before COVID in 2020. So we were in the process of relocating. I was pregnant with my second child, and I had him in late February of 2020, 2 weeks before the first lockdown started. And so we were in a new area with a new baby. We don't have any family. My husband is British and I'm from Tennessee, so we didn't have any family around. And it was, you need a lot of community support when you have a new baby, and we did not have any. And so it was really tricky for us. Tricky is like an understatement. It was a really dark time. We were really lucky and fortunate to have enough resources and to be safe and to be together. You know, a lot of families were separated in lockdown and we weren't. I had the opportunity to have a healthy, normal delivery because COVID hadn't started. They weren't, there was a time when mothers were having to give birth alone in the hospital. And I fortunately didn't have to do that. So there was a lot to be grateful for, but it was a very hard time for our family and for me in terms of my mental health. I to put my clinical hat on, I think I would say that I had like late onset postpartum depression. Mm-hmm. And so I was sort of like in survival mode for the first 6 months and just did what I needed to do. And then when things started to open up again and the baby was sleeping through the night and things were like objectively a little bit safer, I didn't feel better. So that's how I would describe postpartum depression, my experience. And I really fell back on my songwriting, which has been, writing has always been something that I spend a lot of time doing. But I found myself really like leaning on that. And I remember I had a very, like, it's kind of woo-woo to talk about it, but I called a friend from high school who's a visual artist. And I said, I am supposed to be writing songs. Like, what have I been doing all this time? And she was just like, it's not too late.
Love hearing that.
And so, and she gave me a book to read, and I just like dove headfirst into that for a year. 2020 was like a blur, but in 2021, I sort of made a commitment to writing 50 songs. And I knew, just because I'd had some experience, I knew that and needless to say, it was not a reasonable, we didn't feel like it was a good idea for me to open a new business in 2020 in a new place. So I hadn't gone back to my private practice.
Right.
And that, which had been the plan. So I had some time on my hands. And I knew from having written before that I would need co-writers and a lot of support to do that. So I started, reaching out online to people and finding people to write with. Got myself in some vocal coaching sessions, and ended up writing 55 songs in 2020. And out of that body of work came Invisible Woman.
Brilliant.
And my album.
Yes. Okay.
Yeah.
That's I love you walked right up to it, the actual album Invisible Woman. I've taken some notes. I'd love to, if you would indulge me, go back to some of the topics that
Sure.
So many important topics, an amazing story. The first thing that jumps out to me is like, man, when you can look back in hindsight, and I love your attitude of, the attitude of gratitude, right? To remember, even during the admittedly dark period, there were some things that lined up so beautifully for you. And one of them that I'm, reflecting back to you is like that extra time, instead of putting that effort into opening your practice. It's like, okay, you know what? I'm going to get into songwriting. And that's the reason we're having the discussion today. So very, very cool. That whole part of your story. 55 songs. I want to get, so was it initially like a song a week, or was there like a specific, pattern or parameter that you had that way? Or was it just like, see what comes and 50 happens to be the number? Or was there
I'm pretty sure. I mean, I'm pretty sure that I saw on TikTok somewhere that if you want to be a professional songwriter, you have to write 100 songs. And I don't know how many songs I'd written before that, but I wasn't at 0.
Right.
And I also just like to get good enough. Like I was definitely doing the work of trying to get out of my own way.
Okay.
And to try to get over writing perfect songs
Yes.
to
Okay.
get to just writing.
Very
So
good.
that was really why I set the
Yeah.
goal. And I knew that I had two tiny humans who were dependent on me, and that maybe 100 wasn't a reasonable goal.
Fair enough. Fair enough. Yes.
So I picked 50.
So you picked 50 and
And
you
yeah,
did
and I stuck to
55.
it. And
Yeah.
I also, I worked a little bit with a woman named Grace Askew, who's a creativity coach. She's a longtime songwriter, performer. She was on The Voice, but her whole thing is like sort of helping you get over
Mm.
perfectionism in your writing.
Mhm.
And so she was giving me these exercises of like writing a song in an hour,
Oh, wow.
with a group of just like starting with a random set of words and writing a
Yeah.
song to completion. So
Right.
that was really, I wasn't like setting out to write an album. I was
Mm.
setting out to um get to what I had to say, like to write, just to get out of my own way.
Totally. Yeah. Getting the
Um,
reps in without this expectation of perfection or
yeah.
anything
And
like
I
that. Yeah.
think that was the biggest thing that got in my way as a writer when I was younger, and is why part of why I didn't pursue music professionally when I was younger.
Mm-hmm.
Because I always knew I was talented. I always knew I was good at it. And I certainly had some opportunities, but I felt like very overwhelmed by the need to be good at it and to be
Interesting.
the
Yeah.
best at it. And I think
Gotcha.
that really got in my way, right?
Mm.
Like that's really a form of procrastination
I
to
love you said
be
that. Yeah, that's 100%, and it's people say it's like having such a high standard. In fact, it's an advanced form of procrastination, right? So yeah,
totally.
yeah,
Yeah.
very, very cool you said that. Yeah, interesting stuff. So when you're getting into the dynamics of writing a song in an hour,
Hmm.
what does that feel like? And you're talking like I love the term embodiment, connection of the head and the heart, and so to
Hmm.
speak. So is that just like an intuitive
I
just
think
trust your instincts and just
for
go
me
for
it
it?
is like
Yeah,
trusting. It helps to have a co-writer to get
sure.
to do it the first few times, just so
Yeah.
that you um like have a sounding board. But yeah, just like going with your first thought, going with your first idea rather than
Mm,
criticizing the idea or
right.
editing the
Yeah.
idea, and just going with the idea and figuring out where you get and not being attached to the outcome.
Yeah. Ooh,
Which,
good.
I was going to say consequently, I think I mean coincidentally, or maybe not coincidentally,
Yeah.
is what yoga is all about and what
Right.
like healing is all about is
Yeah.
really like, and what my psychotherapeutic work is all about is helping people become more intuitive and trusting
Mm,
that they trusting that they can trust their body, trusting that
mm,
their intuition is safe, right?
yeah.
So for me, it was like a really like a really a culmination of a lot of the work that I had done
Yeah.
before to do that.
Yeah, right. It isn't that, and
Uh-huh.
again, isn't that fascinating that different elements of your life from the
Yeah.
past just kind of intermingle and connect and resurface in these beautiful, collaborative ways, like later on.
Sometimes
So
ironically, yes.
yeah, right. Yeah. So yeah, I mean, lots of accomplishments that you've had over the years. I get the impression a lot of fulfilling work, lots of fulfilling work.
Mhm.
Interesting that you did have, like you mentioned, it was pretty funny. I wasn't expecting it. We were talking about like songwriting is my first life, and then I got into investment
Investment
banking. I'm like,
banking.
I'm like, hold on, wait. You kind of went on like a 90-degree angle there, didn't you? So, but interesting that you, like you say, you did that. And again, you phrased that, you may save some money. You've learned what you didn't want to be
Hmm.
necessarily, right? So that's an important lesson. I like what you were mentioned too, like an expectation of, you felt this perhaps a social expectation from your parents, whatever it may have been. There was an expectation versus like doing fulfilling work. So for you to find that out, I'm
Well,
gathering
and
that's pretty early in your life, right? Was that in like early 20s kind of
yeah,
thing? Okay.
early 20s. Yeah, I only
Yeah.
worked in finance for 3 years.
3 years. Okay.
I was pretty immediately miserable.
Yeah.
And I would say, like I know people who enjoy working in finance. Like I don't, it's not the industry, but I certainly was not listening to myself. And I align that with being sort of in an eating disorder. So like being
Mm,
um in an extreme way disconnected from my intuition and my
yeah.
body.
Yeah.
And so I felt an expectation from society and from my family. I don't know that it was explicitly from my family,
Gotcha.
but my parents definitely like both worked in finance and thought that I was great and smart
Yeah.
and like thought that I could do great things.
Mm,
And so I felt like that was an acceptable thing to do. But in hind, it's no, I wasn't listening to myself, right?
yes.
Um,
Yeah.
and it took me some time to learn how to do that. In hindsight, it seems very obvious that I was going to be unhappy in investment banking, but it
Right.
wasn't obvious to me
Right.
at the time, you know?
Right. And even 3 years of running it just to make sure, it's like,
Yeah,
but
I
honestly,
mean,
like yeah. Sorry, go ahead.
oh no,
Was it? Yeah.
I was also kind of lucky because I started right in 2007, like at the downturn.
Ooh.
You know,
Yeah.
there wasn't a lot going on.
Right. Right.
So
Interesting time for sure.
yeah, so
Yeah.
it was like, okay, if I'm not still not in, like if I'd been busier, maybe it would have taken me longer.
Fair point. Fair point. Again, one of
Um,
those things though, you're looking back and it just so happened to be in this massive dip and
yeah,
everything else that came with 2008. And that's just when you're doing it. You're like,
yeah.
I'm not really getting, you know what I mean? Not for
No,
me.
no.
So very interesting stuff. I want to get into, so after from there, you mentioned the uh, body image and getting into exercises, practices that help you in getting into embodiment, yoga, things
hmm
like that. And was that a matter of just following your intuition as well, getting into that? What was that stage of your journey like? Like,
Um, I went into yoga like kicking and screaming.
yeah.
Like I was a runner
Oh, wow. Okay. Yeah.
and I was like, no,
So
like this
different.
is
So different.
stretching.
Yeah.
And I was very wrong. And I found it very boring at first because it was hard for me to sit with myself in that way. Um, but I will hindsight is 2020. The studio that really where I fell in love with yoga, they chanted at the beginning of every class, and
Cool.
music was a really big part of it.
Mm.
And I feel like vocalizing actually helped me like get in my body.
Oh, okay.
That was the original for me.
Kind of the,
That was the core of me. Like it sort of
yeah.
spoke to the core of me.
Yeah.
And I was able to get into it in that way. I also went to therapy kicking and screaming. I knew I wasn't happy with the way things were, but like I didn't like talking to somebody about it.
Mm. Okay.
And I was very lucky to have a therapist who was an expert in dealing with what I was dealing with
Mm.
and who was available over a long period of time because she like stuck it out. And then over time, um, she changed my life.
Yeah.
And so did yoga.
Mm.
And I was able to I wouldn't say like change me, but get back to who I was. Like I feel like
Yeah.
an eating
Yeah.
disorder is really just like a disconnection from yourself or any sort of like disorder. Disorder is a problematic word, but any sort of like
Yep.
mental health struggle that's not like actually a chemical imbalance in your brain
Right.
is like an expression of dis-ease inside of yourself.
100%. I agree with that. I do another podcast on addiction recovery.
Mm-hmm.
My story is through like alcoholism,
Mm-hmm.
and 100% that's what it was. It was that. It's like as soon as I made the switch from just the mechanism of actually drinking, which I needed to initially, is like the
Mm-hmm.
triage, like stop doing the
Yeah,
drinking,
yeah.
then getting into the work of like what is the drinking covering up,
Mm-hmm.
and making that connection was, yeah, absolutely. I'm like, oh, okay, this doesn't necessarily have anything to do with the drinking. I'm just using the drinking as the mechanism to like numb out that thing that trauma or whatever I'm trying to avoid. Right. So
Mm-hmm.
yeah. So interesting. Yeah. I appreciate the honesty and the openness about that, that time of your journey. I'm also picking up that you came back with that knowledge, that self-knowledge that you have, and then you're sharing it with other people. It was important for you to come back and find people that perhaps were a few miles behind you that were still in that struggle, and you're going back there and then you're helping them through it. Like, hey, I just did this, right? It's still fresh in your mind. So I imagine that was like a great way for you to go back and then help others going through the same thing, right?
Well, yeah, and I think it's a lifelong ongoing process of like knowing yourself. But I think that the idea that you like there's so much magic to be had in life once you let go of an addiction or a disorder or whatever it is that you're dealing with, that it was very inspiring to me to work with people. And also, um, you know, I eating disorders are not specifically for women, but I definitely was trained and treated from a feminist standpoint and sort of understanding that the personal is political and the ways that like bodies are objectified and marginalized and compared to one another and how that relates to our world at large.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm very passionate about that and, you know, liberating people from that and helping them understand that like there's nothing wrong with them, that there's something wrong with what's going on outside of them.
Mm.
I think is it's life-changing and world-changing.
Yeah.
And ultimately that's what my album is about, you
Very
know,
cool. Yeah.
that the invisible work that we do, the thing, you know, the
Mm.
stuff that we do behind closed doors to understand ourselves, to connect with each other, to parent our children, to care for our elderly parents, like, you know, those moments that are quiet, that aren't necessarily paid labor, are actually the most magnificent and life-changing and world-changing.
Mm.
Even though in the way that we talk about work in our world, it
Right.
doesn't really apply.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. That totally makes sense. And it's what a great segue to get into, you know, we'll come full circle and come back to the album itself. You know, there's so much to talk about with the album.
mm-hmm,
So we have the, you know, the whole backstory is like you know, the elements of your life that led you up to this, you know, the reps that you got in, the 55 songs that you put in.
mm-hmm.
Just curious, how many of those 55 songs ended up on Invisible Woman in one form or another, whether you
11.
modified 11. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So 11 of the 55 songs made up the album then. Is that?
Yep. Mm-hmm.
Wow, very cool. Did
Mm-hmm.
you find, I'm always just curious by the whole creative process. So
Mm-hmm.
if we'll do a little bit of a deep dive into this.
Of course.
So the 11 songs, how much of them were just as is? Like out of the 55 songs, you just literally just re-recorded them, and how many of them were modified or like refined or polished up or whatever term you might want to use?
So the way that this album sort of like happened to me, I realized at one point what I did first is I started playing the songs at open mics.
Mm-hmm.
And through that process would sometimes refine the lyrics or the arrangement. And then I sort of realized gradually and this is not how, like, for example, I'm making a second album and this is not the process for the second album. Like
Okay.
I very much like fell into this first album. Like it sort of, again, happened to me. I realized that like I was writing these songs that like a lot of them were about how postpartum motherhood, identity, and the pandemic had impacted me and my concept of myself and my relationships and my
Mm-hmm.
mental health, and that they were sort of like a natural body of work. So there were other
Mm.
songs that were complete that I love that just didn't fit into that.
Mm.
And then I would say that the production process, collaborating with a producer, is when the final touches were made. But most of the songs on Invisible Woman, now I'm thinking, most of the songs on Invisible Woman, like the original arrangements,
Wow.
are the songs.
Very cool, right?
Yeah.
So
Mm-hmm.
again, going back to like that whole just trust your intuition, the first idea is the best idea, you know, potentially, or just keeping out of your own
Yeah.
way.
Yeah.
And yeah.
With some, I would say, like, I think the structure is like, you know, you learn. I was, again, fortunate to have I had been educated in how to write a song and like what song structure is and, you know, what the sections are and how they should relate to one another. I've gone to writers' weekends. I've sought
Mm,
out education. So that knowledge, like there's the creative process and then there's the sort of like
the
the container, like the structure.
Totally. Yeah, exactly. You have the
Yeah.
parameters, you have
Mm-hmm.
like the whole idea of song structure and such. Yeah, very cool. Very cool.
Mm-hmm.
So how collaborative was the album? So if you've picked your 11 songs, I'm imagining, actually, this will be the first question. I'm imagining, are those 11 songs, is it sort of like themed? Like you pick the 11 that have sort of recurring themes in them? Like, did you already have the album name in mind and like what kind of message you wanted? Okay, interesting.
Nope. I had a song called Mothers
Okay.
and decided I was going to produce it myself.
Mm-hmm.
And that took me a very long time.
Yeah.
And I hired some musicians online on Sound
Okay.
Better.
Yeah.
And then I finished that one song, and then I was like, I want to do more of these, but this took a very long time. So I'm going to hire one of these musicians that I worked with to produce a couple of more songs.
Mm-hmm.
And then and then as I did like 3 or 4, I was like, oh, I've like these other songs also relate. It was like it sort of like snowballed, like it sort of grew. It was like a very much a process. Like it wasn't, I did not start with the concept in mind and then build the album. And at that point, that's when I was like, I need like a project manager. Like,
Gotcha.
and that's how
Okay.
I started working with Joe.
With Joe.
Yeah. And at that point, then I worked with 2 other producers who each took a chunk of the songs
Okay.
and did the instrumentals, and then I recorded all of the vocals at home.
Wow. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's so cool. Like the way that this just I admire your ability to just go with things, like it comes in.
Thanks.
That's very much like, it's very much like the the getting out of your own way. And look at what beautiful things happen. There's a degree of like a surrender or some faith
Yeah.
and faith in your own abilities, but then also faith that somebody else's, the universe is collaborating with you in a sense, right? The right thing happens to you at the right time, provided that you're doing the right thing, which clearly you have been. So very, very cool. I'm a bit nerdy about like, album production and such. And it's cool. Yeah. So Joe, just a quick, we mentioned him at the beginning, but for folks that don't really know what we're talking about. So Joe has a wonderful, service, we'll call it. It's called the Online Recording Studio. I believe that's the website, onlinerecordingstudio.com. Super easy to find. Joe Wadsworth. I hope
Wadsworth.
Thank you. Okay. Yeah. So very easy, super likable guy. I had him on about a year ago, and yeah, what wonderful idea he has, and execution and just enthusiasm and all that. So how did you get hooked up with him, as far as like, was it just a Google search engine thing, or was it word of mouth?
No, I think they reached out to me on Instagram.
Okay.
And then I ended up, I was sort of like hemming and hawing about that's totally an expression that my British husband says. And I don't know how it just came out of my mouth, but I was like trying to, I didn't know what I was doing. I was like trying to figure out what next step to take. And I had just a coaching call with him. And I actually just like did some coaching sessions with Joe about, he knows a lot about, the online world of music in particular, which is like a lot to take in, but also like there's a lot of opportunity as an independent musician that wasn't there 20 years ago when I was first writing songs. So he was just giving me advice, and then I ended up we got along really well. He like got what I was doing, and I decided to hire him to assign producers to the rest of the album. I really just like I mean, maybe this is like too on the nose, the metaphor, but I felt like this music needed to be out of me. Like I just like needed to get this out.
Yeah.
Like very much like a labor.
Right. Okay.
Like I was just like, I don't want to sit on this. Like I just need this out of me. And like it will either like eat me alive, or it will like be out of me. So yeah, so I was just like, let's do it, let's make it. And we made it very fast. So we made it then like, in 3 or 4 months.
Yeah. I was gonna say, do you prefer that pace, or in hindsight, would you take like you mentioned, I mean, the cat's out of the bag, you mentioned you are working on a new project, which we can get into. Are you finding that there's a different pace, or do you like that kind of wham bam pace of like, let's get this done? Like, tell me a bit about that.
I do like to work fast, but just because I'm somebody who has a lot of ideas and get really excited about things, and like go all in for better and for worse. But but definitely this second project, I'm conceptualizing more from the beginning.
Okay. Yep.
And thinking of it more as cohesively as an album, sonically. Like I'm
Yeah.
working more closely with my producer
Yeah.
to create a sound, rather than just doing sort of, not that it's lesser than, but the first album was more just like a singer songwriter,
Mm,
sort
okay.
of acoustic vibe. And this is definitely more cohesive and sort of uh, thought through.
Thought through
Mhm.
and more instrumentation, or does it still have a
More,
singer-songwriter heart to it? I
it has
imagine.
it
Yeah.
has a singer-songwriter heart to it, yes,
Right.
but definitely like a mixture of programming and live
Yeah.
instrumentation, which there is some of on Invisible
Invisible.
Woman.
Yeah.
But I was really Dan Weeks did actually, who's my producer on my second project, he did Last Generation on Invisible Woman.
Mm.
And I was really impressed with his ability to his sort of um, artistic sense of production, and that he was able to create a sonic that reinforced the lyric.
Ah, got you. Yeah.
And that's something that for the second project, I really wanted to be pushed. Like I wanted
Mm.
to do something that I couldn't make on my own.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so that's why I've worked with him to do something a little different, but that will still appeal to my existing listeners.
Yeah, gotcha.
Mm-hmm.
Gotcha. Just like the next progression, right? It's
Mm-hmm.
yeah, super cool. So what were some of your favorite things that surprised you? Because like, I mean, I imagine this being like your first, like that being, we'll go back to Invisible Woman, the first album that came up. What elements of that surprised you, whether it was um, the way it came together,
Mm-hmm.
trusting other people to help share your vision. You mentioned the sonic reinforcement of the album. What were things that you're like, oh shoot, I didn't even know this was a thing, and now you're just like, okay, this is what we're doing?
Do you mean parts of the process?
Parts of the process, even the way that the album turned out. Yeah, let's parts of the process.
I think definitely like the art of production is something
Okay.
that I wasn't, because the work that I've done in the past, not that there I'm not at all trying to say that there wasn't art to the production, but it
Mm,
was definitely like the recording that I've done in the past was definitely like a live band feel.
gotcha. Okay. Yeah.
And that, like when you're making the idea that you're making a piece of recorded art is a little bit different than
Yeah.
like you're recording your live band performance.
Certainly. Yeah.
And so I've just been fascinated by that.
That's
And
cool.
that you can still have a live band performance, that those two things can both exist.
Yeah. Right. Yeah.
Um,
Cool. So I imagine this with heading into the second album, you have this whole new mindset or mind frame surrounding like just audio production in general, and the way that you can tell a story
yes.
with the production as well as your actual story that you're with the lyrics and such
Yes.
too.
But
Yeah.
also I think knowing, I think something that I have learned in my life along the way that's very important, and it maybe speaks to what you're saying, that I'm like able to go with the flow a little.
Mm-hmm.
Because I don't think that anyone who met me when I was 18 would think that I was somebody who went with the flow.
Gotcha. Yeah.
Like I was like, you know, like outlining my biology book on Saturday nights in high
Okay.
school, like
Okay.
with
Yeah.
color-coded highlighters. So,
Yeah.
like,
Tremendous.
I've gone through some changes, but
Yeah.
I think really, really owning and knowing what I'm good at,
Mm-hmm.
and really, really owning and knowing what I'm not good at,
Okay. Yeah.
is one of the best lessons that I've learned in my life and through healing
Yeah.
from mental illness. Is I have no interest in becoming a producer.
Okay.
Do you know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
I am a writer, I'm a songwriter, I'm a singer, I'm a vocalist. That is how I express myself. That comes easily to me.
Mm.
And that doesn't mean that it doesn't take hard work, because like being talented, particularly in music, is like the bare minimum, right? Like you
Mhm.
have to take that talent and like hone it, right?
Mhm.
To get anywhere. But I think that in my earlier life, I thought that working hard meant like learning things that are new and like looking for things that are hard
Mm. Yeah.
rather than applying discipline to the things that come naturally to you.
Ooh. Wow, what a distinction. That's brilliant. That's a great yeah, great phrase. Great yeah, great thing to say. Thanks. Yeah. That
Sure.
gave me goosebumps. That's a what a great, honestly, what a great lesson. And I think part of what you're saying about getting out of your own way is realizing egoically, perhaps, and I don't want to put your words in your mouth. Let me this is just what I'm thinking of is when you say you realize owning what you're good at and owning what you're not so good at,
Mm-hmm.
where a lot of people have a hard time with that, right? Then that's where
Mm-hmm.
that trusting comes in, where they're outsourcing and they think they're lesser than, if they're like, if they had some help, like, no, I want to be a producer and I am
Mm-hmm.
going to learn it. And then they miss out on this experience, this beautiful collaborative experience where you can go, you know what, you enjoy doing this. This is like hard work for me. I work hard at this, but I enjoy it. So let's kind of meet in the middle that way. You know what I
Yeah,
mean?
and like you
Yeah.
should be doing the things, and particularly for women in our particular culture, like you should be doing the things that no one else can do.
Right.
And that's what, like for me, I think about my days and my energy as like, what are the things that no one else can do? No one else can mother my children. Like no one can fill that void for them.
Yeah.
And no one else can write my songs
Mm.
and perform my songs. Like those two things are unique to me.
Yeah.
Um, and for someone else, it might be no one else can produce a track. That's just not that's not my genius zone. Like it took me 6 months to produce one track. And it's like, you know,
Yeah.
very acoustic and just like it sounds lovely, but there's nothing exciting going on,
Yeah.
nothing like innovative or revolutionary.
Gotcha.
And so yeah, and like if you spin your wheels if I spin my wheels looking at sound waves,
Yeah.
like I'm taking energy from my kids or my art,
Yeah. Right. Yeah.
or trying to make a spreadsheet
You're right.
and trying to
Right.
build a financial model.
Oh yeah. Yeah. You want to go back to that, do you? Maybe
Yeah,
that'll be your third album will be about like your
right.
time, your time and yeah.
I could do that. It just
You
would
could.
take a lot of energy
Yeah.
that for someone who's just like a numbers person,
Yeah.
it doesn't take that.
Right.
My
Yes. Yeah, exactly. That's a good analogy, good comparison.
my husband actually works in finance and
Oh,
he's like a human calculator. Like
well,
he
there we
can
go.
like he doesn't have to look at the model. He can like
Yeah.
know where he's like, oh, if you change this number, it should change this. And
And you're like,
he
cool.
loves that. He
There you
loves
go.
it.
Yeah. Perfect. Isn't it ironic or interesting that you fell in love with and married somebody that's a human calculator?
I feel as if we could psychoanalyze that,
Right?
but
Yeah. That would be a whole nother part of a podcast,
it would be a whole nother
Yeah. Yeah.
podcast.
Yeah. Okay. A couple other things that
But
jumped out
he's
at me.
also, I feel
Oh,
like I have to say,
please do.
he's also very musical and creative and
He's
has
got
an
that whole
amazing
brain going on,
has
eh?
a
The whole brain.
musical ear. But like,
Interesting.
like no one is all one thing.
Right. Yes. Yeah. Very, very worth mentioning. I'm sure he
Mhm.
appreciates that as well.
Yeah.
you know, especially after being called the human calculator.
Yeah.
He's also musically inclined. Okay, there we go.
I think
Yeah.
he'd be proud that he was called the
Okay.
human calculator.
Right. Okay. I could. Yeah. Fair enough. Fair enough. Okay. A couple things, and you mentioned it was a very powerful quote that you had, a few minutes ago when you're talking about this album, that being like Invisible Woman,
Mm-hmm.
was either going to eat me up or it was
Mm-hmm.
going to get out of me. So
Mm-hmm.
that's how important it was. So what was it? What was the feeling like in October when you released this? Like, was there that cathartic feeling? Is there still some residual in there? What has it been like since you've released it?
It was, I will say, I mean, the actual day that it came out, I just felt like this. I just like didn't know what to
Oh,
do with myself. Like
interesting.
but it's also very interesting, it's sort of anticlimactic to release an album, right? Because it's like, okay, it's out and like I'm looking at Spotify and like watching people like it's sort of, and it's hard to measure whether or not it's successful right away
Sure.
because but I did have an album launch party and a show where my two of the three producers on the album came and performed with me, like for all my friends and family. And that to me, like the day after that show, I felt so just proud and like full and
Yeah.
whole. And like that really stuck with me for a good, I don't know, day. And I was like, okay, next.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
I was a very,
Yeah.
it was a very what's the word I'm looking for? Poignant feeling. Like
Yeah.
that's too negative. But it was just a very it was a significant
Yeah.
moment
Significant.
for me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I love how you said it was like, yeah, and it was like that for a day. And then, yeah, I'm like, because I was going to ask you, like, I'm glad that you were taking that in and embodying that after all
Yeah.
we've talked about. You're like, yeah, in about a day. I was like, yeah, I'm sure some of it in jest, but some of it also,
Well,
seriously,
it was
like,
confidence building. I was like,
sure, sure.
I have more to say,
Heck
you
yeah.
know?
Right. That's like
Yeah.
your moon landing. I'm like, well, I've got the album done. So like, what's, what is going to be next? And yeah, absolutely. Confidence. I'm interested too. I know like for my, different albums that I've released over time,
Mm-hmm.
it's like as soon as I've gotten that one album energetically out
Mm-hmm.
and it's released, like usually with like a ceremonial type thing, like you mentioned, the
Mm-hmm.
album release party, it's like instantaneous. My satellites go up and I start like receiving what's next and all
Yeah.
that. It's like this, like, okay, this energy's gone. And now I'm like, it gets
Makes
very
room.
dense, right? It makes room. It gets very dense towards the end, and it's just like, oh, and then you get it out, and then all of a sudden it's like this like freedom and lightness to it. So was that a similar experience, or how would you describe your energetic experience?
I think that's pretty accurate what you said. I mean, so logistic, like concretely speaking, I went right into like my brother's wedding
Mm.
and then a week of work on my
Oh.
second album.
Oh wow.
So
Okay. Yeah.
which
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
had already written.
Oh. Okay.
So so
Yeah. Wow.
I was definitely like hungry.
Gotcha.
I was like chomping at the bit
Yeah, you
to
were
do
ready to
more.
go.
And
Yeah.
part of that was because um it it took a while because of, I had been it what I couldn't when I first had these ideas, I couldn't put them out because had very young children. I was still recovering from birth. Like I was like ready for those to be out and like to say the next thing. I think that's part. I don't think that I'll feel exactly that hungry for the next one after this project is out. Because
Interesting. Yeah.
it did feel like that was the culmination of me getting through something hard.
Yeah.
Um,
Heck yeah.
but yeah, but I was also just like really excited to do
Yeah.
more. Yeah.
Very cool. Yeah, lots of there's some layers, there's some like energy interplay in there for sure. Are you finding that some of the themes from Invisible Woman is there like a through line into this next album that you're working with?
I think of this next album as like the light at the end of the tunnel.
Mm.
Like I really wanted to think about, Invisible Woman was self-indulgent in not a bad way, but like in the themes because it was truly confessional. Like it was like
Mm.
this is how this time affected my sense of self and my marriage and like my ability to like tolerate the unknown in life. And
Mm.
I I wanted this next one to pull more from my professional experience and be like, okay, when you go through a hard time like this and you heal from it, what's the payoff?
Mm.
Like
So it's
what do you get?
yeah, so it very much feels like it's like a 1-2, like, or it's a like a second part, or like the epilogue, or like the
Or like
summarization,
the
or
flip side,
the flip side of it.
like the darkness before it's the
Yeah.
dawn after the darkness kind of
Yeah.
thing.
Oh, that's so cool. Yeah.
Yeah. And so, the freedom that one feels when you
Yeah.
do the hard work on yourself, right?
Yes. Yeah.
Because we all experience hard things, but we don't have to do the invisible work. We can
Yeah.
just drink
Yeah.
or
Yeah. Yeah.
um,
Yeah.
control our food in our bodies
Yeah.
or
Hmm.
whatever it is that we do.
Yeah. Wow. Some very important, heavy duty messaging. And yeah, I love it. I definitely admire that about you. Just being able to, yeah. So like you're saying, Invisible Woman, very much. I like the quote. This is paraphrasing you, but indulgent in a confessional way, like really getting
Yes.
into the darkness. And you know what? Like, especially in an empathetic experience that music is,
Mm-hmm.
that darkness, that's why blues can be super uplifting, right? It's like some
Mm-hmm.
of the saddest thing that I've heard, but yet I'm like, man, somebody feels like me or somebody gets me, right? So I can
Yeah.
imagine that would be so powerful for ladies out there, and even men that are like married to ladies that are going through this, the postpartum depression, whatever it may be, right? How like that's so accepting for them. And then for you to then put, like you mentioned, put your more clinical hat on and be able to like have this objective view of like, this is you on the other side of it. Pretty, I mean, take out the pretty, very important topics and a beautiful story that you're telling between the two albums. So
Thank
very,
you.
very cool work that you're doing.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that.
Yeah, thank you. One thing that stood out to me, I might just jump around with a couple few questions as we wind
Oh,
things
please.
down here. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So you mentioned, I was fascinated by this idea too, like when you were starting out the, or like the trial runs of the songs,
Mm-hmm.
essentially for Invisible Woman, doing an open mic nights.
Mm-hmm.
Incredibly brave. That's like, I liken that to like a comedian going and doing an open mic night.
Yeah,
Like you don't really know how you're going to be responded. Nobody necessarily knows who you are. Very brave, but also there's a blanket of anonymity when you go up there too, because
totally.
nobody knows who you are. So yeah, how was that experience for you? How long were you doing the open mics? And was it external as far as like, oh, I need to change that? Or was it just your experience, your personal experience going, I can tweak that a little bit, or a bit of both? I asked you a bunch of questions there. I'm sorry.
No, no, cool. It's cool. I didn't get a lot of objective feedback necessarily. Like this lyric needs to change from people listening. It was more like feeling it out and
Okay.
like feeling whether or not the song landed the way that I wanted it to when I played
Okay.
it. And I feel like sometimes you just can't know that until you play it a bunch of times. Um, and I think for me it was so fun, and I am one of those. I'm a very introverted person. Um, and I feel very alive on stage. Like I am just very comfortable doing that, which I think is weird, but it it's true. Like I'm just like more comfortable doing that than I am like at a cocktail party. Like having to
Interesting. Eh?
talk to
Yeah.
do like small talk. Like I'm
Yeah. Yeah.
not
Okay.
good at small talk. So
Yeah.
so so for me, I was like, why have I not been doing this like every
Mm.
week of my life? Like what have I been doing with myself?
Mm.
Um yeah. So
Yeah.
yeah.
So cool. So I relate to you on that. Like I get much more nervous because like when I've had to do like public speaking, I go red. I'm having a hard time making eye contact or establishing eye contact. But when I'm on stage, there's this, I don't know what it is. There's like this performance, or
Yeah,
I
you're
don't
just like
know,
in
right?
I think you're more in your body, like you're yeah.
Yeah.
Um
That makes sense. That makes
yeah.
sense. That's a good observation, actually. I've
Mhm.
never thought of it like that. So, but I totally get you. There's like this whole other, whatever. I don't want to say persona because it's still me, but yeah, perhaps it's more in my body instead of like, oh, what are these people thinking of me? Like,
Yeah,
yeah,
well, I mean, like our famous artists talk about that you have like a
yeah,
stage persona, like
fair
Sasha
enough.
Fierce and
Sasha Fierce, yeah.
Ziggy Stardust
Stardust,
and
like Pete Townsend, didn't have an alias, but he said he completely changed. I think that,
hmm
yeah, absolutely. Super cool. You don't have an alias, do you?
I don't.
Okay.
Although I've given
No,
that a lot of thought.
you're like, not yet. Yeah.
Yeah, I
That
have
could be
given that a
the,
lot of thought.
yeah,
I'm like, maybe I
interesting.
need an alias, but not
Yeah.
yet. Hasn't
Not
come to
yet.
me.
Not
Mm-mm.
yet. Very cool. And doesn't Garth Brooks have an alias too?
I,
And
that
he like
that
did a whole
vaguely rings a bell that there was
very
like a movie
90s.
about it or
Yeah,
something.
I think you're
But
right. Yeah.
I don't remember. I think he
Yeah.
actually rebranded himself. I think he like
Really?
fully
I think
and
you're
then
right,
went back.
actually. Yeah, I think you're
I
right.
don't partial
Right,
knowledge, but it
yeah.
rings a bell.
Anybody that's Garth Brooks fans right now is just yelling at us. No, but yeah, dude. Either way, I've really enjoyed this talk, and all the best of
Likewise.
luck to you as far as just like I'm definitely gonna you got a new fan in me for sure.
Oh, thank you.
I'll be definitely following you, and I really admire the work that you're doing. I had a great conversation with you today. Where can folks find you online if they want to reach out to you, follow you, listen to your music?
Sure. So I post on Instagram every day. So that's the place to get updates on shows and what new work that's coming out. Lauren Minear Music is my handle. That's my handle on all of socials as well. I'm attempting TikTok, but I haven't figured it out yet. YouTube, you can find me. My website is laurenmaniermusic.com, and Invisible Woman is out on all streaming platforms, so you can listen to it on Spotify, Apple Music, or wherever you stream your music.
Brilliant. That was going to be my final question. I'm sure you noticed at the beginning I didn't use your last name just in case I mispronounced it. So I'm really glad that you, in full disclosure, so Minear.
Minear, yes.
Okay, cool.
Yes.
So Lauren Minear, Invisible
Yes.
Woman. Check it out. We'll have all her links in the show notes. Really appreciate you coming on. And today, and I know that you're right in the middle of, working on potentially on the second album, not to give too much information. Yeah, right. Top secret stuff. Don't want to jinx it. Like I say, may or may not be working on it. Well, so that's super cool. And yeah, I always like to just quite frankly, put my guests on the spot. If there's one little piece of advice or a quote or anything that you'd like to say just to wrap things up here today, the floor is yours. Lauren, thank you so much for coming on.
I've recently been saying to people that if there's one thing that I could tell my younger self, it's that nobody knows what they're doing. So people are making up things as they go along. So that means that you get to make things up too, right? Like every fact we've learned, every idea that is well known was somebody's idea that they thought of, right?
Ooh, I love it. Okay. That is a perfect place to put the pin in this. Lauren, thank you so much.
Thank you, Matt. Take care.
Thanks.